I was in his presence when he showed me the thing I cannot describe without trembling. I had been there long enough to understand that everything I had done in prayer, every morning, every meal, every night for 43 years, had been something other than what I thought it was. He showed me this not with anger. There was no condemnation in his presence. What I felt radiating from him was grief. Deep, ancient grief. The kind that can only come from love watching something go wrong for a very long time. He showed me specific prayer patterns, patterns I recognized immediately, patterns I had performed just that Tuesday morning. And as I watched myself from that other side, I understood for the first time what I had actually been doing. Not prayer. Something that wore the clothing of prayer. Something that went through the motions without ever making contact. I came back to tell you this. That's why I'm here. Not because I chose to have this experience, and certainly not because I'm qualified to deliver a message from God. I'm a construction site manager from Ohio. My hands are calloused. I have no theological training. I'm not the person you'd send with this kind of warning. But he sent me back anyway. And when I understood why, when I understood what's at stake, I stopped asking questions and started talking. But to understand what he showed me, you need to know who I was before. My name is Michael Hargrove. I was 43 years old when this happened. Construction site manager, been in the trade since my early 20s. I'm the kind of man who shows up early, solves problems, and doesn't talk about his feelings unless someone is bleeding. I grew up in the church. My parents were faithful people. I was baptized at 11, married Sarah in the same church at 27, and had served on the deacon board for 6 years by the time of my collapse. I prayed every morning before I left for work, every meal, every night before sleep. I knew the Lord's Prayer by heart. I knew Scripture. I could tell you the difference between the Synoptic Gospels. By every external measure available to me and to everyone around me, I was a faithful man. What I did not know, what I genuinely could not see, was what my faith had actually become on the inside. My prayers had become a routine. I ran through them the way I ran through a morning checklist. Make coffee, pack lunch, pray, drive to the site. The words were right. The names were right. All the correct pieces, assembled in the correct order. But somewhere along the way, and I cannot tell you when, because it happened slowly, the way erosion happens, the living thing inside those words had gone quiet. God's name was still in my mouth. But the person saying it had stopped arriving. I didn't know this. I thought this was just how mature faith felt. Less emotional, more stable. I'd watch Sarah pray sometimes. She'd pray aloud, just talking, sometimes crying, sometimes stumbling over her words. And honestly, it made me uncomfortable. I thought she was being emotional. I thought her approach was immature. I preferred my ordered, predictable, controlled method. It felt more serious to me, more dignified. I now understand what I was actually watching when I watched Sarah pray, but that understanding cost me something first. It was a Tuesday. Nothing about the morning was different. I had done my usual prayer at breakfast, 3 minutes, maybe 4. The sky outside was the flat gray of early November. I kissed Sarah on the way out. She said, "Be careful," like she always did. I told her I was always careful, like I always did. I was at the construction site by 7. We were framing the second floor of a commercial build, and I had a subcontractor showing up at 9 who was already 3 days behind. I had coffee in my hand and a punch list in my head, and I was standing at the edge of the site running through the day when my chest did something I can only describe as a seize. Not pain, exactly. More like a sudden compression. Like something inside was being wrung out. And then the sky tilted. I didn't lose consciousness all at once. There was a second where I knew something catastrophic was happening. I had time to think, and this is the part that stays with me. I had time to think I should call Sarah. Not for any good reason. Just, I want to hear her voice. And then the ground rushed up. The next awareness I had was Dr. Chen's voice. I didn't know her name then. I only know it because the hospital told me later. She was saying something about a pulse. Then her voice receded. Everything receded. The sounds thinned to nothing. Then the quiet thickened into something with a texture. A silence unlike any I'd known. I reached for something to hold on to and found nothing to reach for. I left my body. I know how that sounds. One moment there was the slab of concrete, the gray sky, the noise of the sight. The next there was none of that. No weight, no cold. I could see my body below me. I could see Dr. Chen's team working on me. A man on the site held a phone, calling Sarah, I found out later. The scene was clear, and I watched it without urgency, without the weight of any of it. And then there was a light, not above me, not from any direction, just present, everywhere and nowhere, and it was pulling. I don't have the right words for what happened next. 8 months on, every analogy still falls short. The light wasn't just brightness, it was knowing, completeness, presence so total that the word presence doesn't cover it. When I moved into it, if moved is even the right word, I felt something I can only call being known, not being seen in the casual way. Known. Every thought I had ever had, every motive underneath every action, everything I had ever hidden, from other people and from myself. All of it. Simply there. Transparent. Held in that light without judgment, but without concealment either. You would think that would be terrifying. It wasn't. It was clarifying in a way that nothing in a physical life can be. There was nothing left to protect, nothing to manage. Whatever I had been holding together for 43 years simply wasn't needed there. And in that strange freedom, I became aware of him. I'm going to call him Jesus because that is who he is. Understood immediately, without anyone telling me, without ambiguity. His presence wasn't like a person standing in a room. It was the room. Everything I was experiencing was happening inside his awareness. My first instinct, and this embarrasses me to say out loud, was to introduce myself. I was going to say, I'm Michael Hargrove, I'm a deacon. I've attended Calvary Baptist for 16 years. And then the absurdity of that impulse hit me. He knew me. He had always known me. He knew me better than I knew myself. He knew my prayers, every single one of them. And that is when I saw the sorrow. The grief emanating from him was not about my sins. It was not condemnation. It was the specific sorrow of someone watching a person they love deeply be absent from them while believing they are close. He knew my prayers, and he grieved them. He didn't speak in language. I want to be clear about that. There were no sentences. What happened was more like direct understanding, information transferred without the medium of words. He showed me. The first thing he showed me was myself, praying at my kitchen table that Tuesday morning. I watched it from wherever I was. I watched myself speak the words. I watched my eyes close in the appropriate posture of prayer. I watched my hands fold the way they'd been folding since I was a boy. And I watched my mind. This is what broke me. I watched my mind moving to my to-do list before I'd finished the second sentence. The words kept coming out of my mouth while my mind was already at the construction site, already itemizing the punch list, already drafting the conversation I needed to have with that subcontractor. The words were addressed to God. The mind was somewhere else entirely. Then he showed me what prayer actually is, not as a correction, not as a lecture. He simply placed both realities side by side, and the contrast was devastating. Real prayer, whatever it is at its core, is a transmission between the innermost place of a person and God. It requires something to be actually present, not performing presence, not enacting the ritual of presence. Present. Arrived. Then he expanded the view, not just myself but millions of others. Mechanical repetition in churches, rehearsed phrases lifted without attention, beautiful liturgy spoken by minds already somewhere else. He wasn't singling me out. He was showing me a pattern that runs through an enormous portion of what the church calls prayer. And he was grieving all of it. And then he showed me myself praying in church. Clearly, confidently. And I saw what I was actually doing. I was performing prayer, delivering a credible religious expression to an audience. Somewhere underneath the words was genuine faith. But the prayer itself had become theater. He grieved that too. He wasn't finished. He had more to show me. And this next thing, I need you to stay with me. Because this one is the one that most people never see coming. He showed me a person kneeling in private. Sincere words of devotion, real words, words that felt true as they were spoken. And underneath those words, buried beneath them like a sealed room, bitterness. An unforgiveness so old the person had stopped being consciously aware of it. It had become part of the foundation of their interior life, no longer felt as a sharp emotion, just there, sealed. He revealed that this sealed room functionally interrupts the transmission, not because God refuses to hear a person in that state, but because that person has divided themselves. Prayer requires a kind of radical openness, the willingness to be fully known. And a person with a sealed room of bitterness has decided, somewhere below conscious awareness, that full openness is not available. Part of them is closed, and what is closed cannot be touched. And then he showed me something I was not expecting. He pulled the camera, if I can call it that, from that anonymous person and pointed it at me. I saw my brother. I haven't spoken to my brother in 4 years. I could give you the reasons. They are real reasons. Real wrongs were done. But I had never once in 4 years connected that sealed room to my prayer life. I thought they were separate categories. My faith was over here, and my family history was over there. He made me understand they had never been separate. Then another pattern unfolded. Prayer of disguised self-interest. The things we ask for your glory, when what we actually want is comfort, status, relief. He showed me a moment I remembered clearly. I had prayed for my business to succeed so that I could tithe more. A noble prayer, the right language, the right theological framing. And underneath it, what I actually wanted was the security of a full contract pipeline. I saw the distance between the stated motive and the real one. And then I witnessed how many times I had done that. I was not a hypocrite in any conscious sense. I genuinely believed the motive I offered. But he sees through layers I don't have access to. And across my entire prayer life, the words and the real interior orientation were not the same thing. If any of this is finding you, if you're still somewhere between recognition and resistance, stay. Because what he showed me next is the thing I was sent back to tell you. The one I still cannot reach without the breath leaving my lungs. He was about to show me the root. The root is this. He showed me, and I am going to try to describe what I saw. He showed me my entire prayer life as if from above. 43 years laid out like a long corridor. And at the end of every prayer, in every room of that corridor, he was there. Waiting. Not absent. Waiting. And I was there too. With my words. With my correct postures. With my folded hands and my closed eyes. We were never in the same room. Jesus showed me the fundamental error beneath all the other errors. Not just the mechanical routine, not just the unforgiveness, not just the disguised motives. Beneath all of those was something more foundational, and once he showed it to me, I saw it threaded through my entire prayer life. Even in the moments I had considered my best, I had always treated God as a means to an end. Not consciously, not deliberately, but structurally, in the deep architecture of how I related to prayer. God was a resource I accessed, a power I invoked, a system I engaged to produce outcomes I wanted. Even when I was genuinely grateful, the gratitude was oriented toward what he had done. Even when I loved him, and I believe I did, that love was inseparable from what I needed from him. He showed me across 43 years of prayer that I had never, not once, not in any sustained way, simply come to be with him. Simply to know him, without wanting anything in return. Not healing, not provision, not guidance, not even forgiveness. Just to be there, with him. I watched myself, and I could not find a single moment of pure presence. And then he showed me the consequence. Not punishment, something more sobering than that. I watched what happens to a person who practices this orientation for decades. The soul learns the shape of the absence. The form of prayer becomes natural, while the substance, actual contact, actual meeting, actual being with, becomes progressively harder to access. The motions become the whole thing. When I understood this, when the full weight of it landed, I did not feel fear. I felt grief. The same grief he had been carrying. How many years had I spent in a room with God's name on the door while the room was empty? I had the furniture of faith, the language of faith, the habit and the structure. And the actual person of God had been just on the other side of a door I never quite opened. Something in my self-understanding as a praying man collapsed. Everything I had built that identity on was still there. But I could see now what it had actually been. Before he released me to return, the quality of what I was experiencing shifted. The grief was still present. I don't think it ever leaves him. But something else moved through it. Something I can only describe as tenderness. He was not sending me back with a list. He was not correcting me with doctrine. What came next felt less like instruction and more like a hand extended. 4 words. No explanation needed. In that place, I understood all of it immediately. What the words meant, what they would cost me to remember, and why they were, underneath all the revelation, the whole thing. Seek my face, not my hand. Come to me to be with me. Let the requests be secondary to the presence. Let the relationship itself be the prayer. And then his presence began to recede. Not all at once, more like a tide withdrawing, the fullness pulling back, until all I was aware of was the absence of it. And then a dark weight on the edges. And then the weight crushed down everywhere at once. There is no gentle way to describe re-entry into a body. The pain slammed into me. My chest, the compression, the aftermath of what had happened to my heart. Sound collapsed in from everywhere. Machines, voices, a steady beeping, someone saying his name. Can you hear me? I was in a hospital bed. Sarah was there. She was holding my hand, head bowed, not looking at me. She was praying, aloud, quietly. The way she always prayed when she didn't think anyone was listening. Raw, unpolished, personal. Stumbling over the words, finding them as she went. Telling God things she knew about me and things she was afraid of and things she was grateful for. All in one long run-on sentence that had no theological structure at all. I could not speak. I had tubes in my throat and equipment on my chest, and Dr. Chen was somewhere in the room saying things I should have been tracking. But I could not look away from Sarah, because now I understood what I was watching. She was there. Actually there. In that room. With him. Not performing. Not managing. Not requesting, exactly. She was being. Present. Arrived. The words were secondary. The relationship was the prayer. I was weeping before I understood that I was weeping. The tears were just there, running, and I couldn't have explained to anyone in that room what they were for. Dr. Chen told Sarah later that she thought I was in pain. I was not in pain. I was watching my wife pray and seeing, for the first time, what it actually looked like. That image, Sarah's voice stumbling and finding the words, her head bowed over my hand, is what I carry into every prayer now. That's what I want you to understand about everything he showed me. I've told you what he showed me. I want to make sure you hear what it is and what it is not. It is not a condemnation of your prayer life. The grief he carried was not anger. He grieves the distance the way any father grieves when his child is in the room but not really there. The warning is not that you are bad at praying. The warning is that you may have been doing the motion of prayer for years, faithfully, sincerely, without ever quite making contact. And most people in that pattern have no idea. I had no idea. I don't have a technique to give you. I'm not going to hand you a 5-step method. What he gave me was simpler and harder than any method. Begin by stopping. Sit in silence. Not to clear your mind. That's something else. Sit to arrive. To let God know by the act of your presence that you came not for something, but for him. From that place, let whatever is real in you rise. Let the requests come from inside the relationship. Let the words be honest, even when they're ugly. Let the silence count when the words don't come. I pray differently now. I cannot always find the right language. There are mornings where I sit in my truck before work, and I say nothing at all. I'm just there, trying to be actually there, trying to arrive, and something is present in those moments that was never present in my most polished prayers. I know the difference now. That's what the NDE gave me that I will never lose. Jesus sent me back because you needed to hear this. Not all of it applies to everyone, but some of it applies to most of us. And if any part of what I described today found you, If you recognized something of your own prayer life in what he showed me, that recognition is not an accusation. It is an invitation. You still have time. The door is still there. And he is still on the other side of it, waiting, the way only someone who loves you without conditions can wait. Not all prayer is prayer, but the real thing exists, and you still have time to find it. If this found you today, if something in it landed, let that be the beginning of something. Not a method, a return.